With just 64 days to go before the election, the sprint to the finish is in full swing today. Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz are wasting no time, flooding the zone with a flurry of campaign events across the battleground states, using this Labor Day to make their case to union voters and organized labor. Vice President Harris kicked things off in Detroit, flanked by Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer and two of the most powerful voices in organized labor, Shawn Fain of the United Auto Workers and Randi Weingarten of the American Federation of Teachers.
We celebrate unions because unions helped build America, and unions helped build America's middle class. It is true across our nation, and it is true here in Detroit. For generations in Detroit and across our nation, the brothers and sisters of labor have stood together to righteously demand fair pay, better benefits, and safe working conditions. And let me say, every person in our nation has benefited from that work. Everywhere I go, I tell people, look, you may not be a union member, you better thank a union member for the 5-day work week. You better thank a union member for sick leave. You better thank a union member for paid leave. You better thank a union member for vacation time. Because what we know is when union wages go up, everybody's wages go up. When union workplaces are safer, every workplace is safer. When unions are strong, America is strong. But what we know is as we fight to move our nation forward, Donald Trump intends to pull us back to the past. But we're not going back. We are not going back.
Meanwhile, Governor Tim Walz is taking that very same message to union workers and labor leaders in Minnesota and Wisconsin today. We'll show you some of his remarks when they happen. And this is just part one, the start of their battleground blitz on this Labor Day. Because at this hour, Vice President Kamala Harris is en route to Pittsburgh, where she and President Joe Biden, a native son of Pennsylvania and a staunch supporter of labor unions, will join forces on the campaign trail for the very first time since President Joe Biden's history-making decision to bow out of the presidential race and endorse his vice president, Kamala Harris. They will be joined today by Pennsylvania's powerhouse governor, Josh Shapiro. We'll bring you those remarks a little later in the program when they get underway live. But make no mistake, this orchestrated power play for blue-collar voters and labor union households, a play that involves calling on some of the most talented and powerful and effective voices in the Democratic Party, well, it stands in stark contrast to what's happening on the other side. The events of the disgraced, twice impeached, 4 times indicted ex-president. He has decided to spend his Labor Day at Mar-a-Lago. And notably, as the New York Times reports, Trump's campaign calendar for, quote, the first half of the week is not yet clear, end quote. 64 days until the election, Mr. Trump, tick-tock. It's where we start the day with some of our favorite experts and friends. Former Republican Congressman, MSNBC political analyst David Jolly's here. Also joining us, Professor of History at NYU, Ruth Ben-Ghiat is back with me at the table for the hour. Distinguished political scholar and professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude is here. Eddie, I start with you because we watched that. It was just about 2 minutes from Vice President Harris's clip together. She is strong and getting stronger. I have always been a fan of her retail political skill set. I thought when she launched her event, and political historians will write their own history of her sort of lifespan as a candidate, but I have always been impressed by her political talents. She gets stronger every day. And I've seen her give this stump speech. It sort of always happens to be when I'm on the air, so I've had the benefit of getting to watch a lot of her events live. She is just, She's just very good at this.
She's getting better and better, and I think it has a lot to do with what it feels like to be unscripted, even though she is. So the more she gives the stump speech, the more comfortable she is with the content, with what she's saying. She's improvising in and around the hit lines, and you can feel the emotion that she's bringing to the table. So it's really, really wonderful to see a political figure evolve as we've had a chance to witness from 2010 to, I've known her even when she was AG in California to now. So it's really, really powerful to witness in some ways.
You know, and this is, I mean, David Jolly, since this campaign started, the Harris campaign, she is a campaign within a political phenomenon. I mean, we can cover the polls as though it's some clinical exercise, but the reason she's up every week is because there's something happening in the country, and you see it in your normal life, and then and I think especially I was away last week, and so I sort of saw it in my regular life. People who don't necessarily watch what I do every day, but that I know in my normal life. I'm sure we all have these people in our lives. We're only mildly interested in what we do 24/7, election year, non-election year, have questions about what's going on. They have heard about this Harris-Walz ticket. And I think when you then zoom in and watch an event, you can see why there is something happening on this Democratic side.
Oh, that's right, Nicole. Vice President Harris finds herself leading a new political movement in the country, and people are doing it because they believe in her. They're doing it because of her message about optimism and looking forward and not going back. They're doing it because they feel confident in a vessel, in someone that can beat Donald Trump, that perhaps when they looked at Joe Biden previously, they couldn't. But I also think they see, today's a perfect example, a remarkable contrast between the candidates. I mean, I actually love this kind of holiday, Labor Day setup that we're looking at between Harris and Trump. First, the optics of Donald Trump sitting like little Richie Rich, or I guess old Richie Rich, at the golf club in Palm Beach that he owns. Not just that he's a member of, that he owns. He's sitting there by himself ringing his bell for Diet Coke. Vice President Harris is out there with raucous crowds of working class voters across the country. And the other contrast that we seem to often lose in the Trump years is that there actually are policies that matter. Right? Donald Trump says, I'll be the most pro-union president you've ever seen, while also knifing unions in the back because he doesn't understand the policy. The truth is, Republicans of the past could at least articulate their reasoning for what you call right-to-work laws, which don't allow compulsory union membership to get a job. You see higher income, but you see lower wages. You see higher executive pay, more payout to shareholders, not to workers. Vice President Harris, Joe Biden, they support the right to organize, which says, no, if you're going to participate in a trade economy often, that you are going to join a union, and those unions are going to protect your benefits and give you higher wages. You're going to see higher wages. Vice President Harris and Joe Biden can have those policy conversations where Donald Trump doesn't. And the reason it matters, not just for the opportunities for working class voters that are there with Vice President Harris, but despite all of the political movement and enthusiasm behind Vice President Harris, the fundamental, foundational strategy today that still will decide this election is the blue wall strategy in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Even though we've seen the numbers continue to grow for Vice President Harris, those states are still up for grabs, and without them, the vice president doesn't win the White House. She's putting in the work today. Donald Trump's sitting at his golf course.
Harris was in Detroit. She delivered a big speech surrounded by union leaders and tried to contrast her and the Biden administration record with Donald Trump and hit the former president over his policies.
So intends to pull us back, including back to a time before workers had the freedom to organize. He appointed union busters to the National Labor Relations Board, and he supported so-called right-to-work laws. We fight for a future where every worker has the freedom to organize.
And one union member spoke about Project 2025 and its effect on union workers.
Trump said he was going to protect our jobs and then lost nearly 300,000 jobs on his watch. With the Project 2025 agenda, it will give him power to go after the right to organize, and it will try to dismantle our unions and then make life even more expensive for us.
The race is also kicking into gear. We know the general election traditionally starts after Labor Day. This year, quite different with a more recent nominee in Kamala Harris. But total it all up, and you have just 9 weeks to the actual election day. Early voting begins in some states as soon as September 20th. That's Minnesota and Virginia, 10 days after that first Trump debate. So you can see everything coming down the pike. There are signs that Trump is also still struggling to adjust to his new opponent, and he's on defense over several issues. As the Post puts it, with little chance of improving his standing, quote, Trump's advisors see the only option is damaging hers. The bulk of TV spending by the campaigns and their allies were attacks on Harris. So it is a busy Labor Day start to the general election. Biden and Harris coming out moments away. We'll bring you that. But we are joined now by Vanity Fair's Molly Jong-Fast and Professor of Politics and Journalism at Morgan State U, Jason Johnson. Welcome to both of you. Jason, what do you see on this Labor Day?
What I see is the Democrats laboring across the country. You have obviously Harris and Joe Biden are campaigning together. You have Tim Walz and his wife are in Minnesota and Wisconsin. You have Doug Emhoff down in Virginia. But for some reason, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have no scheduled events on Labor Day. I guess they're taking time off. But it seems like two campaigns going in very different directions on a key weekend that, at least in political science terms, is the real beginning of the campaign.
Yeah. And Molly, we've heard a lot about interviews. It is a tradition to have a sort of joint interview with the running mate, and the Harris-Walz campaign, their ticket just did that heading into this weekend. Some people may have heard about it. It was with Dana Bash on CNN. Some may not have caught the whole thing. We're just going to play one part of it here, relatively new, where Harris again hits this key theme about wanting to turn the page from Trump.
We have had in the former president someone who has really been pushing an agenda and in an environment that is about diminishing the character and the strength of who we are as Americans. I think people are ready to turn the page on that.
Molly, your thoughts, A, on sort of the really down the middle kind of, I don't want to say centrist, but sort of traditional campaigning messaging she was doing in that interview, number one. And number two, what we've learned since then is that it, on the channel that it aired, a competitor, full disclosure, whatever, fine, they had absolutely huge interest in the interview, which I mentioned as a political fact. Right. They had more than quadrupled what would be the typical audience there. About 6 million people, which means just like we saw at the DNC, there seems to be an awareness when she and Walz do things, people are checking it out at the very least. Whether they vote for them, we don't know yet.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting thing about Harris. She doesn't need to just run as anti-Trump. People are interested in her as her. And you see that from the money she's raised, from the volunteers, from the sort of army of people who are, you know, voter registration numbers are crazy. That these are proof that she's actually popular as herself. And so what she's doing, which I think is very smart, is she's sticking to policy. For example, what we're seeing with Labor Day, right? Donald Trump has never been a labor president, and many parts of the Republican Party have really organized against labor, like thinking of right-to-work laws. So you really do have a Democrat, you know, Democrats really can run on labor and run on unions and support for unions. And you'll remember Biden actually marched with a union. So this is a good way to sort of show, not only to be anti-Trump, but to show what Harris can do.
Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought that the importance of that interview, to be perfectly candid, was more for the Acela Corridor media elite than what actual voters care about. Because as Molly said, the voters are hearing what they want to hear from Harris, because every time she and Tim Walz are on the air, the ratings skyrocket. They're filling up stadiums. And that's not just about ego. That's about men and women, young people, old people, all races, all colors and creeds saying, hey, I am interested. And once somebody's interested, selling them on your policy is much, much easier. I think what's going to be interesting going forward is, well, what happens when Harris does, say, a press conference with a bunch of random questions? I know she'll be fine, obviously, because she's been sitting vice president of the United States. But as she moves from the sort of insurgent new candidate into the traditional candidate over the last 8 to 9 weeks, it's going to be very interesting to see how that may change how specific her policies and how specific her policy presentations get, even as they're still building up rallies, registering voters, and quite frankly, recently expanding the electoral map that they think they can win with.
Yeah, and we both of you mentioned sort of the context of Labor Day, which is a day off for many Americans, not a day off for politics or the news. And the Trump Walz ticket sort of taking a back seat. Harris not only campaigning, but going out with President Biden. It's also a fitting day to look at what Donald Trump has said recently when he's talking to his sort of billionaire allies, because him and Musk got themselves sort of in trouble on their conversation recently in talking about labor crackdowns. Take a listen.
I mean, I look at what you do. You walk in and you just say, you want to quit? They go on strike. I won't mention the name of the company, but they go on strike and you say, that's okay. You're all gone. You're all gone. So every one of you is gone.
Jason, that's actually a kind of textbook violation. There's already been a complaint filed about it. Of course, whether you can hold a company responsible for a politician's sort of unhelpful banter, if you want to call it that, it remains to be seen. But I thought it was a fitting piece of sound here for Labor Day. What do you see there in that contrast, Jason?
I mean, there is no greater contrast. There is no greater water and oil than a guy who came to prominence over the last 10 to 15 years by firing people, right? Like Labor Day is supposed to be the day where we talk about labor getting together and organizing against corporate forces in order to give regular people more rights. The man became famous saying, I don't care how good you did. If I have some particular peak of the day, I can get rid of you. And bragging about it and laughing about it was someone who quite arguably, for all the companies that he has run, the most famous acquisition he has of recently, there's not a person alive, not a tech reporter alive who will say that he has run this company better. I think that shows how out of touch Donald Trump is. Maybe this was okay. He was never the popular vote winner. Maybe this was okay to have this kind of brash, obnoxious, anti-worker attitude in 2016. It's not where Americans are now. It's not where post-COVID Americans are now. And it just shows that he doesn't really know how to connect with people. Maybe that works with Elon Musk. It's not going to work with somebody in the middle of Michigan.
And Molly, we have in the corner of the screen the preview shot. We've seen Biden and Harris arrive there. They haven't, of course, yet taken the stage. We're going to bring people this live Labor Day rally. But I'm curious if you want to reflect on the politics of them rejoining. On the one hand, by all accounts, they have Biden and Harris a great governing relationship, and she navigated the difficult period for the administration when there was the question about whether he would stay in the race or not. She navigated it, with great aplomb. But politically, you can't avoid the fact that the whole reason she's the nominee is that many people in the Democratic Party decided Biden was not anymore the best possible choice for the future, which is not to say that there wasn't a lot of thank you, Joe signs at the DNC or that there are states where you can be helpful. So I'm curious what you see here in what is fundamentally a political dance they're doing as they come out today and campaign in certain places where it's helpful while she still tries to strike her own identity.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have seen before presidents not endorse their vice presidents at great peril, right? We've seen that happen, and the candidates have lost. And what I think Biden did, which was really excellent, was there was this 3-week period where he was sort of came to his own decision, and then he was able to fully endorse her. And even, when you would talk to people at the campaign, they would say, he says, if you want to honor me, make her win. And that is a really great message. Because remember, he didn't step down because he wasn't a good governor. I mean, he was good at governing, but he's the oldest person to have ever run for president, right? He's 81 years old, and he couldn't do the campaign. And by the way, now Republicans have run on age and mental acuity. Well, now they're running the oldest person to ever run for president, which I think is pretty interesting.
And joining me now, senior MSNBC political analyst Matthew Dowd. He also served as a chief strategist for the 2004 Bush-Cheney campaign. And Democratic strategist Don Calloway, host of the Caucus Room podcast and founder of the National Voter Protection Action Fund. Don, first to you, there's been no major post-convention polling bump for Harris. Strategists in that camp are sort of okay with that, given the fact that they want this to look like a 50-50 race. They're trying to spin it that they are the underdog here. But when it comes to union households across the nation, Harris's lead over Trump is outside the margin of error. Only 1 in 10 U.S. workers are union members, but that ratio then shrinks to 1 to 5 in swing states. So how crucial are union voters to the ground game and getting out the vote as part of the Harris-Walz coalition, Don?
They're extraordinarily crucial. They're not just voters, but union voters tend to be among the more politically engaged. So if you have a union support, that's boots on the ground, folks knocking on doors, folks making phone calls. And we have to remember that Vice President Harris's electoral map is different than Joe Biden's in that it doesn't solely rely on that upper Midwestern blue wall. She's looking also at the Sun Belt, so Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia. She puts those states into play, but you absolutely cannot concede the blue wall, which is pretty much particularly in a Democratic constituency, determined by how active labor unions decide to be, both public sector and private sector labor unions. So she's not conceding that territory, and we see that by where she's spending Labor Day and really engaging with her campaign activity.
You make a great point there, Don, about the map in addition to the coalition building. And I want to come back to the map while we stay on this idea of union members and then business leaders, Matthew. Where is the difference there when it comes to how they're reacting to VP Harris at the top of the ticket? And where, in your view, do her pro-worker policies differ from Biden's, or don't they? Is she just carrying that mantle?
Well, the second question I'll deal with first, Ellie, is I don't think there's much difference between the two on the pro-worker policies. I think it's a continuation of what Joe Biden has pushed really for his entire life. The support of unions, the strength of workers, the raising the minimum wage, having a living wage, all of those the vice president supports in this. And so I think that's where she is on that, and that's what I think is a benefit. The interesting thing about the coalition she's attempting to build and building in this is she has both union workers and workers behind her, but also most of the Fortune 500, I think, is very reluctant to support Donald Trump in this. Most of the business community realizes a stable leadership that's not chaotic like Donald Trump is better for them. And so she, interestingly, can have a coalition that is both pro-business because they want stability, they want some predictability, and pro-worker simultaneously. What Donald Trump has is a lot of rich folks from Silicon Valley that seem to support him. It's not the business community, it's not the Fortune 500, it's sort of very wealthy folks that think they're going to get a benefit from his presidency.
Yeah, and we saw some of those folks try to find a different avenue in the GOP primary, whether it was briefly with Tim Scott or Nikki Haley, and then some of them ultimately ended up coming right back home to Trump. I think one of the things that the Trump campaign is trying to do is ensure that some of these union workers will come home to them again. They've had success with that in 2016 and in 2020 in some of these critical states. So, Matthew, could they again in 2024?
Well, this is a race that's going to be decided by 3 or 4 points. So any margin on any community of any subset of the electorate is important. So it's not only union members. If Donald Trump tries to shave off 3 or 4%, that could have a profound effect in a race that's only going to be decided by a few thousand votes spread across 7 states, as Don said. So, yes, it's important, though I think she has a much better benefit this time around than actually Joe Biden did, because she has actually an enthusiasm advantage over Donald Trump right now that Joe Biden didn't have, and that is true even among union workers.
It's a fascinating thing, this dynamic around carrying enthusiasm, but it's also a question of speaking to the issues that voters say are important to them. Among those are abortion and reproductive health care. Trump has been vocal about this idea of sending the issue back to the states, but he also angered conservatives this week for saying that Florida's 6-week ban is too short before then reversing course and saying he'll vote to uphold that ban in Florida. Trump also then signaled his support for a ballot measure to legalize recreational marijuana in Florida. Conservatives oppose both of those positions, by the way. So how does the Trump team, Don, bridge that gap, and do they need to?
They need to bridge the gap, but I've been trying to make this point quite inarticulately for some time now. Over the last 10 years, Donald Trump has not been held to a standard where he's had to articulate substantive positions. And as a result, he has campaign staff all around the country, up and down the ballots, who don't know how to pivot, who don't know how to cobble together substantive positions that you need to pull together the loosely based coalition to win a presidential election. Donald Trump thus far in his career has just been allowed to bloviate, name call, and really engage in a whole lot of bombastic behavior to win elections. But it really does feel like with most shticks, the jig is really up on that. And we've seen that manifest with this abortion position, where this man is absolutely just in a whirlwind and doesn't know what to do. Now we see it in the marijuana stuff, but it's really reflective of the idea that he's never had to pin his campaign or his actual administration to substantive and executable ideas, and he's not going to be able to do so in a serious way in the next 60 days.
Matthew, I think what Don is saying there on these various issues, but I've always seen this on abortion with Trump back from the time that I was covering him in 2015, and he got over his skis at one point where he was saying that he thought women should be punished for accessing abortion. That was way out of step with where the party platform was even at that time. So now that you see him trying to have it a few different ways on this issue, saying he's very proud of having overturned Roe, but then also is proud to send the issue back to the states. He's now trying to muddy the water around things like IVF. What does that tell you about the importance of this issue and the way that the Trump team is thinking about it?
Well, this is the problem, to add on what Don just said. This is a problem when you're not a principled conservative with a substantive stand on certain issues, where you know how to speak about them and you know how to relate to them when they become complicated. Donald Trump has never had principled stands on this issue. I think, as you know, Allie, you've covered this, Donald Trump has had multiple stands on choice. He's been pro-choice. He's been all of the different things on this. He doesn't have a principled stand on this. And so when you have a series of backers who are conservatives, who then join a cult of personality with somebody that has no principled stands on these conservative issues, you get in this free-for-all and word salad that Donald Trump oftentimes speaks on and then has to retract, as we've seen in the course of the last 72 hours, because he doesn't know how and he hasn't thought about this issue in a way that is able to be substantive and principled.
And the reality here, too, is even though the rhetorical stances may be shifting and changing over the years, there is a body of work. There is a track record to speak to in terms of the kinds of justices he put on the court and the ways in which that had major implications across the country on this issue of reproductive health care access. Matthew Dowd and Don Calloway, thank you for spending part of your Monday with us.
In Florida, the state that you are a resident of, there's an abortion-related amendment on the ballot to overturn the 6-week ban in Florida. How are you going to vote on that?
Well, I think the 6 week is too short. It has to be more time, and so and I've told them that I want more weeks.
So you'll vote in favor of the amendment?
I am going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks.
Voting yes or no on Amendment 4 in Florida.
So I think 6 weeks, you need more time than 6 weeks. I've disagreed with that right from the early primaries. When I heard about it, I disagreed with it. At the same time, the Democrats are radical because the 9 months is just a ridiculous situation. So I'll be voting no for that reason.
How many times can a flip-flop-flip before a flip-flop-flip, or however that goes? I don't even know if that's a flip-flop anymore. Maybe that's mean to flip-flops. Maybe it's more like a pretzel, a soft one, squishy one, whatever you want to call it. That's Donald Trump. In year 9 is the leader of what once was the Republican Party, now more like a MAGA movement. Still out loud and before the cameras trying to figure out just what his position really is on the issue of abortion. But it is a fact that he appointed the justices who overturned Roe versus Wade, a fact he can't run from. And with that last answer from Trump, that he's going to vote no on Florida's Amendment 4, Trump has confirmed that a draconian 6-week abortion ban, a time at which most women don't know they're pregnant, is good enough for him to support. Joining our coverage, President of Reproductive Freedom for All, Mini Timuraju. April's back with us. I mean, Mini, some of what has benefited Trump is the fog machine, the blur. I think it's important that he not be allowed to say whatever. I mean, the truth is he's the reason American women are now dying of sepsis in public bathrooms. He's the reason women are infertile because they can't access basic reproductive health care. He's the reason men and women who are physicians have backup plans in case they're arrested for providing health care for women. He's the reason abortion is illegal now, and he's the reason Republicans are struggling in so many elections. What do you want to see happen with this latest rhetorical mishmash from him?
You know, I think what we've seen over the last few years has been an effort on our side to really define Donald Trump on this issue. And since he picked J.D. Vance, the definition has just gotten clearer, right? You've got two incredibly misogynistic, anti-women candidates on the top of their ticket for the GOP. So one of the refreshing things about the coverage in the last 72 hours has been how clear-eyed our friends in the press, activists, candidates, the Harris-Walz campaign have been about making it very explicit that the message stays the same. Donald Trump will say and do anything to distract from his disastrous record on reproductive freedom. He cannot be trusted. What you can trust are the facts, as you just laid out. He appointed the justices. He is responsible for this crisis. And not only that, he's bragged about it, and he wants to punish women and doctors. And that seems to be coming up very clearly with voters. There's a new New York Times piece, a poll about how women under 45 are picking abortion now as their top issue, even over the economy, and that there's a 20-point margin of favorability for Kamala Harris over Trump on abortion.
You know, April, I feel like some of what the media got wrong with Trump was looking at Trump as a politician in a time capsule. I had Fred Trump on today, and Trump describing the men and women who died in service of the nation as suckers and losers wasn't a blip. It was part of a long line that started with a podiatrist writing him a BS note saying he had bone spurs, who didn't have to serve this country.
Yeah.
His views on overturning Roe aren't a blip either. They're part of, you know, grab women in the P word, because when you're famous, they, quote, let you do it. The misogyny is the point. It's not a bug. It's a feature of who Donald Trump is.
So, yeah, Donald Trump right now is in the kitchen cooking spaghetti, taking the noodles out and throwing up against the wall to see which one sticks. And that's the problem. He is desperate right now. In this abortion battle, he is losing. He was losing when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And he said he did that. He was losing at that time, and he continues to lose even more so. And Nicole, if we look at the polling and also the numbers of women who are historically registering to vote in this election process, looking at the numbers of women who are running, particularly Black women who are running to Kamala Harris. Abortion is that issue that the Democrats have, that's that number one issue that they can rely on, that Donald Trump is failing on. So the American public, and we have gone through this for the last 2 years or so, the American public has said that they should not be tampering with the historic abortion issue. Now states are dealing with it, and it's creating havoc all over the place. And as you said, there are women going through sepsis, being traumatized physically because doctors cannot operate on them as they're miscarrying because of laws, and they're scared to go to court. But Donald Trump is at the center of this, and all the things that he has said about abortion rights and how a woman should carry their child or not carry their child.
Minnie, one of the conversations you and I have been having for years now is about bringing everyone in. And you see this reflected in how Vice President Harris talks about this issue, both as President Biden's point person and now as the nominee of her party, that if you think abortion doesn't affect you because you're a man or you're not interested in having kids, or you're wrong, because this worldview, this Trump-Vance Project 2025 worldview will come for everyone eventually. Maybe it isn't abortion, but they're coming for IVF. Maybe it isn't abortion or IVF, but it's birth control. Maybe it isn't either of those, but it's a way of making clear that it isn't just about a single procedure. It's about a second class of humans that includes all women. And I wonder what you think about sort of taking this message and broadening it.
Yeah, I think it's a really smart point. Look, we now know that we can't win these elections without independents and Republicans crossing over. And we've seen in every state where we've had an abortion-related ballot referendum that we have that happening. So, number one, I think voters, not just women, but also men, are seeing the consequences of these bans, not just on contraception and IVF, but in states like Georgia, you're seeing entire swaths of the state where there are no OBGYNs to serve the general population. You're seeing healthcare deserts. You're seeing doctors leaving states. You're seeing young adults not choosing states to go to college because of abortion bans. So the consequences are broadening. But I also think what's interesting right now, and an important point for us to make, is that Donald Trump can't be trusted and that he is beholden to his base. He's made a deal with these evangelicals. He cannot wriggle out of it. So when he tries to wriggle out of Project 2025, we can point to this last 48 hours, 72 hours of interaction. You know, he came out and tried to fudge his opinion on Florida. They came right after him and he flip-flopped right back. So they've got him in their grasp. So no matter what you think of Donald Trump, there's a broader lesson here, which is he's beholden to the extreme elements of his party.
And joining us now, former chief strategist for Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign, Stuart Stevens. Stuart, following the DNC, you said the Trump campaign appeared to be having, in your words, a nervous breakdown in public. So would you say their latest efforts to boost this Arlington controversy indicate some kind of other piece of that breakdown?
Yeah, you know, one of the fascinating elements of Donald Trump, and we exploit this all the time in the Lincoln Project, is that he's the dog who will chase every car. He can never apologize for anything. He can never let anything go. So he's so easy to manipulate. I mean, this is what foreign countries realize. They can manipulate him by praise. So you attack him on this because what he did, I mean, the United States Army put out an official statement denouncing what Donald Trump did. And what it takes for the Army to do that is extraordinary. And yet he will just defend it. And it places, where are all the Republicans who are joining with him, you know? There's not a lot of former servicemen who are out there saying, well, this is great, what Donald Trump has done. But he'll keep defending it. It's the same on this whole reproductive rights thing. It's like someone who knows that they have a bad position, tries to talk their way out of it. You know, Mark Cuban said that Donald Trump was the guy at closing time and the bar will say whatever it takes to try to get someone to go home with them. And that's what you're seeing here with reproductive freedom. There's no moral basis or conviction behind it. It's just somebody who's afraid that his position's unpopular and is trying to talk his way out of it.
Well, I am interested when lawmakers come back to town in about a week and a half about how they talk about the new IVF stance that tracks with a vote that they all took a no vote on just back in June in a Senate bill. I mean, he's putting them in some interesting positions once again. And we did the Trump years on this on Capitol Hill. It seems like that's what we might be in for over the course of the next few weeks and months until Election Day. But you brought up this idea of softening on abortion bans, that in response to Harris's insistence that a Trump second term would further endanger abortion rights. In response to that, Trump shared on Truth Social this quote. He said, "My administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights." Speaking to NBC, he said women need more time than 6 weeks to determine if they need abortion care. Then, of course, he said he would be upholding that 6-week ban. So is Trump safe enough to be casting aside the social conservative movement? I mean, you've run in these kinds of cycles before. You know that you got to stick with the base.
Yeah. You know, the three things you can control in a presidential campaign is what you say, what you spend money on, and where you go. And what's happened here is that Trump is responding to this, what's being laid out by the Harris-Walz campaign. They want to talk about reproductive freedom. He instead of pushing forward to another agenda that might be better for him, he just wants to stay and litigate it. At the heart of this, it just goes back to this fundamental hollowness about Republican policy. What is the bargain that Republicans, not just Trump, Republicans are striking with voters? What do you get when you vote Republican? And that's the thing that I just look at this and scratch my head. What is it that is the positive you get? Now, Trump lost by 7 million votes. He needs new customers. What is he doing to attract new customers? I don't see any program, any policy, any vision that is doing that. And that's why he seems sort of stuck at this 46 level. He won with 46.2%. Romney lost with 47.2%. And even when it was versus Biden after that bad debate, he still had trouble moving north of 47%. And I think that's what you're seeing now, where he's just stuck at that and doesn't know what to do to get out of it.
So when you see this toggling between a ceiling of 46 or 47%, does that lead you to believe, I think it does, that this is not a 50-50 race as the Harris campaign tries to advertise it, and as the polls tend to show it, that it could be wider than that?
Yeah, look, when I worked in presidential campaigns, people would say, "Are you worried about?" And I would stop them there and I would say, "Yes, whatever you're going to say, I'm worried about," because you're supposed to be in campaign. So, of course, the campaign needs to go out there and prosecute this as if it's going to come down to one vote in every precinct. And it very well may be. But I think the more likely scenario is that this race is going to be close till maybe October 20th, 25th. And then I just think that the bottom's going to start to drop out for Trump because he's just not acquiring new voters. I mean, this is what happened to Carter in '80. And I think there's a lot of similarities here. Ultimately, politics has to be about addition. So what is he doing to attract these new voters? And I can promise you this effort to try to get African-American votes, in '64, Goldwater got 7%. In '20, Trump got 8%. That's 1 point every 56 years. He's not going to get north of 9% of the African-American vote. When you look at any of these polls that show otherwise, you should just factor that in, and it's going to prove that Harris and Walz are doing better than these numbers indicate.
Well, certainly we're going to have to look at the way these coalitions come together. There's been some fascinating movement around white women, specifically in some new polling that's catching my attention. So you're exactly right. We're watching the start of tune-in season here on Labor Day. Stu Stevens, thank you for joining us for that.
Thank you.